Hi, everybody. Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. Today, I'm sitting here with Trevor Crean, who is a fourth generation funeral director turned founder of Heritage Gardens Cemetery in South Surrey, Canada. After leading the creation of Metro Vancouver's first new cemetery in more than 50 years in 2018, Trevor has remained committed to cultivating a space for reflection, celebration, and healing. Today, he spends much of his time working closely with families as a memorial design artist, helping them capture life and emotion in stone. So, welcome, Trevor.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
We're glad to have you. So, why don't we get started by learning a little bit more about how Heritage Gardens came to be, what inspired its creation, and what was your vision for the space?
So my family have been in funeral service in Metro Vancouver since 1908. I'm a fourth generation funeral director, as you mentioned, and in my career, in my father's career, and family before that, we've worked with every cemetery in our city, and predominantly their operators are either municipal run, so they're an extension of the city parks department, and so they are really good at cutting the grass and maintaining things, but there's not a lot of personalization. Families don't have very many options. It's just kind of you show up and you can have that spot or that spot, and all the markers are relatively the same, and they just want to keep things simple and easy to cut the grass. Then you have kind of the corporate models, which we have our biggest local cemeteries are mostly corporate, and they're very commercialized. Like they have their 2 hour script that they have to get through, and every family is kind of subjected to the same sales presentation. And they're the feeling that they exude, whether intentional or not, is that you're this is a business meeting. And so the our profession is extremely relationship based. And I think that people, when they're going through one of the most vulnerable and sensitive times in their lives, they deserve to be heard and they deserve some compassion. And it's not a one size fits all. And so what I saw, so we're located in Surrey. We're in South Surrey, which is quite. We're sort of south central for Metro Vancouver, but there's already 6 other cemeteries in this municipality. And so in my rezoning and everything, the province and the city of Surrey were asking, we have 6 cemeteries already. Why do you suppose we need another one? And I said, it's because like all of the cemeteries are just looking at the transaction of, okay, you have a dead body on your hands. Here's a plot. Thank you. We'll see you Thursday at 1 o'clock. But none of them are looking at what are the emotional needs of these families as they return to visit this space, weeks, for months, for years, for decades, as they process grief and loss and what's going on in their lives. So we were kind of outgrowing my family funeral home. Being fourth generation, I had siblings, cousins. There wasn't room enough for us all to be managers, and so we kind of saw this opportunity. This property came up for sale, and it's adjacent to a little pioneer cemetery that's mostly full. It's a little historic cemetery, so there was an opportunity to kind of treat the rezoning like we were expanding that original cemetery, even though we're not affiliated with them. But and we've what this has become is we've really built out a landscape that is kind of we're forward looking. Like our values have changed so much, and even in the last 20, 30 years, about people are way more aware of like their everyday decisions and their carbon footprint and what is the way that we're stewarding the environment these days. And predominantly funeral service is still rather traditional. And so we really just wanted to build out a landscape here that families felt comfortable to return to as frequently as they feel compelled to. And we wanted our landscape to actually calm things down. Like the world, the world you see on TV, the world out there is pretty chaotic. It's pretty stressful. A lot of people are struggling with their finances. And a lot of people, I think that grief could be traced back to a lot of issues, like with people having depression, anxiety, stress. A lot of people maybe turn to self-medication and stuff. And I think it's because a big root of a lot of that could be traced to them not grieving healthily, not having a place to mourn properly, and they just kind of bottle it all up inside. So I'm really trying to help people to express themselves through memorialization and to have arrangements that are actually truly in keeping with the values of their loved one. That's what we set out to do.
Well, and I'll tell you, Trevor, I love the mindset. I mean, it truly is. You know, you're 100% on point with all of your thoughts there, because at the end of the day, I think the families have lost a little bit of the control of the actual funeral and the memorialization and celebration, and to create that serenity, the cathartic space, as you mentioned, you know, brings them not only closer to death, but the acceptance of one's passing. So I think you guys are really understanding, obviously, you know, what is needed. So I commend you for that. And you know, it really does come down to making it a memorable experience for our families. So with that being said, can you paint a picture of your property? Can you tell us a little bit about some of the unique features and, you know, areas and gardens?
So yeah, being a newer cemetery, like this property used to be a landscape center and tree nursery. So we began our development by pulling out old greenhouse foundations and fruit stands and utility sheds and things. So we really had to start with 8 acres of just lawn. And then how it's taken shape is really the result of so many conversations with our client families. Like I had basic, like coming from a funeral background, I knew the basic function of cemetery, but I like a lot of the way, like, so a lot of, at least in British Columbia, that's all my experiences from BC legislation. But a lot of the cemeteries, their staff will just defer to the bylaws. Like, oh, sorry, you can't do this, you can't do that. Oh, it's a bylaw thing. It sounds very official, but the cemeteries write their own bylaws. And so when you're in that position, it's easy for you to require a concrete vault, for example, because yeah, sure, that keeps the maintenance down. That's easy for them, but when you can write bylaws that now subtly become quite an upsell. So, like our minimum concrete vault just became $4,000 that everybody has to purchase. Our minimum headstone requirements are 8 inches thick granite and it has to be at least 36 inches tall. Like you can make there are giant financial incentives that can be derived from writing your own bylaws. And so for us, I have a lot of friends in this in the funeral service cemetery sphere, and so I asked for bylaws, and all the municipal cemeteries, their bylaws are available online. So I combed through the operating models of a lot of the cemeteries, and basically with a Sharpie, I was able to cut out about 3/4 of it and really boil it down to what is essential for running the cemetery, like what's going to, like, people have to figuratively stay in their lane. So you can't let anybody do whatever they want because that's out of control real fast. But within reason, I can let people plant flowers on their graves instead of bringing potted plants every time that last a week and then they blow over and they're messy and they're dead. And I can let people bring adornments and seasonal decorations and things. And I've found in my career that when you give people all of the information up front, you let them make an informed decision, but you also kind of set the ground rules for the relationship. And that's how I've always viewed this work is we're building a relationship. Like me selling a plot, it's not, yes, that's a transaction and I need that to stay in business, but people feel it when I'm looking ahead at, like, as they return over the seasons, and I'm encouraging them to personalize things. I'm encouraging them to be here because if that's what they need. Like it's different for everybody. Some people come for the day of the burial and then we never see them again, but other people come here to walk their dogs or to bring their kids for a picnic. And so I've really, with that in mind, I've really tried to make this a family friendly and a positive environment. And I've found, like, a lot of the rules out there were just really geared towards making it a convenient life for the cemetery operator. But that, I think it's our responsibility to make this convenient and comforting to our clients.
And I agree with you. I mean, you know, it's an artistic expression of their love, of their grief, of the life that was lived. I think it's really important, as you said, and the our viewers would, I'm sure, agree that they have a little bit of feeling of ownership in the sense that it doesn't all just have to be black and white. It can be. So I like what you're saying. I think that you're very forward thinking, and coming from, and I'm not saying this in any way to be to slight the funeral industry, because the funeral industry is vitally important to what we do. But it's not very often you find someone who comes from a background like yourself, generational, who really gets it, and what's kind of interesting is, cemeteries themselves, prior to, let's say, even, the 19th century, were places that people would congregate on a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis to visit their loved ones. And we're kind of going back to that, that feeling of community, and wanting to revisit that space and not associate it with grief. So I really like, hearing what you're saying, because I think you're probably going to change the mindset, in Vancouver itself, as to what the other cemetery operators are doing, not maybe today, but in the future, because you're going to kind of have the model as to what it should be. So, congratulations on being that forward thinking. Now, obviously, I'm sure you offer all kinds of services, but I understand you offer something really interesting. It's called the memorial beehive option. What is that?
So, it's kind of a funny story. So in the beginning, when we started with just like a blank field, and we learned very quickly that just because you open a new cemetery, there's not exactly a lineup of funerals waiting to get in. Like people have a very strong connection to the place that they've used for family members in the past, right? Like, of course, you want grandpa to go where grandma was laid to rest. And so, earning the trust of our community um, and demonstrating that we are different from every other place in town, that took a lot of time and a lot of grinding to just like show up and maintain the place, keep it looking better than anywhere else. But when people drive in and there's no headstones in the cemetery, it is kind of spooky. It's like, oh man, like, is this dodgy? Like, I don't know if I want to be the first one here, kind of thing. And so we had gone through 4 years of rezoning, licensing, construction, development permits, uh, and we opened our doors in September of 2018, and our phone didn't ring for like 4 months. And so my brother, that over the winter, he's like, so what do we do now, man? And I was like, I think we start farming before we starve to death. And so we planted half an acre of veggie garden up by our office, and we got a couple of beehives out here because we've always wanted to be kind of an eco-friendly alternative. And we had no clients, so there was nobody to be accountable to. So we just started farming the place. And it was funny, as we started having visitors and people kind of checking us out and stuff, there was a huge emotional connection to the veggies. It turned into conversations like, oh, my grandpa was Italian. He always had tomatoes. And oh man, this takes me back to like running around in his backyard when I was a kid. And so people loved it. And so we're like, okay, so we kept the veggie gardens going. We actually expanded them to 3 gardens. And then with the beehives, same thing. People were like, oh man, my mom always kept bees. Like, wow, I haven't thought about them in so long. Because we're all urban now, right? Everybody in the city, as much as they have a family history maybe of growing their own food or keeping bees or whatever, a lot of people just can't do that anymore when you're condo living and such. And so the conversations that just came out of just having them there, like I always expected to be temporary until we actually were running the cemetery, but people, it was such like an icebreaker, and people just opened right up and started babbling on about their connections to these things. And so um the to do the bees, I don't know the first thing. I didn't know back then the first thing about beekeeping, because we've had them here for about 6 years now. And so I'd hired a local apiary from a farm about 15 minutes away, and she's maintained our bee colonies. But we started off with 2 bee colonies, and now we're up to 16 because I started asking families, would you like to sponsor one in memory of a loved one? And this traces back to, in my experience with funeral service, one of the hardest conversations I'd have with families is about when you're planning like the visitation, funeral mass. A lot of people struggled with, do we invite the kids? Do we bring the grandchildren to the open casket? And so many people are like, oh, I don't want them to remember grandma that way and stuff. And I know from my experience, my feeling is like kids are sponges, right? They soak up everything. They soak up your energy, they soak up your mannerisms, your body language. And so when you treat death as something that is hush hush and keep it behind closed doors and no, you can't participate in this, just remember grandma how she was. You're teaching them that death is scary and it's something to be avoided and this is a really bad thing that's happened. And so with the cemetery, I really wanted to ensure that families felt comfortable bringing their children here, and it wasn't always the heavy duty like, oh, let's go to the headstone and lay roses and we're going to cry. Like instead, with our beehive memorial program, and there's other conservation programs that have sprung out of that, but now it's like let's go visit grandpa's bees. Let's go visit like we have a conservation program where we have a bronze fish plaque for our cremation gardens. We have 4 cremation gardens now, and anytime you see a bronze memorial plaque in the shape of a salmon, we've made a contribution to our local fish hatchery in that person's memory that raises 300 salmon fry to be released into the Lil Campbell River, which is on the southeast corner of our property here, and it's a major salmon spawning habitat. And so you used the word earlier about control. Like people have no control when a loved one leaves their lives. And so we really try to give them the control of the memorialization and turn it into something positive, that something that you're proud to like come and visit. And it reminds you that this, like, yes, there's so much grief and sadness around loss, but it's not the end. Like life goes on and we need to go on. And so if you can teach your children about this is the cycle of life and look at these small good things that have come out of this, I think it's really important.
Oh, I love it, Trevor. I mean, it's truly a living legacy. I mean, not only the life that was lived, but it goes on in memory and creating that community space, that beautiful, participatory environment where people can come and be part of it. I love your vision. I love what you've created, and whether or not you know it or not, you're far ahead of the curve. You're leading the way here in many ways. So I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation because I think what you're saying should and can inspire many people who want to get into what we're doing but don't quite understand how to do it. And it really comes from the heart. And it comes from the passion that we have for it. So I can certainly see that. And I can. It sounds to me like your community, is a big part of what you do. I mean, have you seen an increased interest in sustainable burial and cemetery options overall, or how have you seen that?
There, I have learned very quickly that there are, like we say, 50 shades of green. Like there are so many people are coming from so many different thought processes, spiritual backgrounds, just their own views on the world. So, there, in the very beginning when we were green burial certified, we were going like door to door to churches, community centers. I'd set up a table in a shopping mall and just trying to really push green burial. And because we were the first green burial certified cemetery in Metro Vancouver, that was just about the only angle I had that was like loud and simple enough that I could just broadcast it to get people's attention. But we're in a 90% cremation market. We're in the highest cremation market in North America here. And so real quickly, I learned that I was just cremation shaming people. And so by talking about all the evils of cremation, I wasn't exactly fostering a spark for green burial. I was just making people feel guilty for what they've done with 2 decades or 3 generations of their family previously. And so I learned pretty quick that we had to meet people on their own level. And that just comes from having a conversation and listening to where you're coming from. And then it's our job to provide options that there's a little something for everybody out here. So we have like our ultra green burial is the vegan standard and it follows the criteria from the Green Burial Society of Canada to a T. But then we have kind of like that in our dedicated green burial garden that's been surveyed for 223 graves, and we have 2 options there. Like one is the sustainable lot where it's the lowest cost burial option that we offer, where we dig down and prepare the grave at about 9 to 10 feet deep, and the first people in these plots will all be buried at that level, and then in the future somebody will be interred above them at like 2 feet above them, and then a third person 2 feet above that, so they're a triple depth lot. And but then otherwise further over in the green burial garden, you can have a dedicated space where it's like a single plot. One person would be laid to rest there. It's a much shallower grave. And for that whole garden, once the burial sites have all been used, like we choose the next available burial site, and then that allows us to conduct the burials kind of in a checkerboard pattern that takes roughly 2 years to fill up about 4 or 5 rows. And then we're reforesting that section from the east end of the garden, making our way west so that we're kind of like I mentioned that watershed, the Lil Campbell watershed is on the southeast corner of our property. And then we're bringing that watershed up onto our grounds through a planting plan. And so that's the most eco-friendly part of the property where we're like really strict on it. But then in the rest of our grounds, people can have as traditional or eco-friendly a burial as they like. I would say like we have a very low rate of embalming. Like it's we bury our caskets directly into the earth, and a lot of the faith communities they typically have their funeral services within a week of the person passing. The traditional Muslim communities have the burial within like 2 days of the person passing, and they're not doing any embalming. And so we just kind of give people here's the whole range of options. And then because for everyone there what's important to them is different. And so what I mean by that is what I've found is super powerful is actually the memorialization. So like in the dedicated green burial garden, you can't have a traditional headstone. And a lot of those people don't want them anyways, but there are a number of people who want something eco-friendly, but they really want to have a nice granite monument or a natural river stone, a small upright boulder. Um, it's different for everyone. And so we've kind of created a canvas here where we have right now about 18 different cremation or burial gardens. And there's literally there's something for everybody.
Well, and rightfully so. And I mean, I totally agree with that philosophy. To each to their own. A different shade of green. Uh, cremation, as you stated, is a very large part of what we do, and it's really the memorialization of those cremains that makes a large difference. And we at the Global Green Burial Alliance acknowledge that, the fact that everyone is, they have the right of choice, and no one should ever feel bad about a choice that they've made in the past or present. And at the end of the day, I've always said that natural burial, truly the real true definition to me, and it sounds like it resonates to you, is the effects it has on the family itself. The environmental part is a wonderful benefit, but the true definition of a natural burial really is the profound effect it has on the loved ones and the attendees, and that's undeniable. So I think it's sounds to me like you have the true hybrid model, and I think that's a wonderful thing because that's the low hanging fruit, and that's the one that's going to be so super productive, showing others, a new way, maybe a very old way they didn't really understand. So I think you're doing great work. And, I'm sure that you've had, many services that have been special to you. But have you had any particular service or moment during your opening that you found particularly memorable or, let's say, impactful?
Yeah. Um, our second burial ever. So in the beginning, I had a pretty strong connection to a lot of the Orthodox Christian churches through funeral service. I knew all the clergy, and so I'd gone around to those churches and done a lot of information presentations and things. And I ended up getting a couple of churches to start kind of like a dedicated um, section for their churches. So like all of their families prearranged at the same time, all the information's transparent. So my approach is that look at like your community, you worship together, your kids go to language class together, they might go to the elementary school together. You do fundraisers and all these things together, and then at a time as personal as end of life, each of your families one by one is forced to shop around what's close to us versus what is affordable. And so this community becomes fractured right across Metro Vancouver. And so my message was simple: is like, hey, let me make a couple of information seminars after your regular Sunday liturgy. I'll come in and answer all the questions in front of everybody. I'd talk to sometimes a room of 30 people, sometimes a room of 200 people, but it's all transparent. There's no angle here. And I know death sucks. I'm the first one. Everything about it sucks. Nobody wants to do this. Expensive, uncomfortable, it's really sad, but it's a fact of life. Like the same way being born doesn't suck. Being born is great. And so it's just kind of the price we have to pay for showing up. So since we're all going to get there on our own time anyways, would you not feel better knowing that your community would all be together one day? And when your priest is going to do your Easter vigil, or he's going to do like a saint's feast day prayer and celebration, that he can come to the cemetery and your whole congregation can be out there for a picnic Sunday, and you can say the prayers over all of your dearly departed in one place here. And you all know that you're getting the exact same price. Nobody's working an angle. Like it's all transparent. And when it's done ahead of time, now it's just out of your mind. Pay it off over 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever you need. And it kind of takes like a big load off of their plate. So in the beginning, our second burial ever was one of our Russian clients, and there's a farm. We're out in a pretty agricultural area, so I'm surrounded by farms, and the farmers the farmer lost a flock. There was all of a sudden 15 sheep appeared like right around us. They came and checked us out. And it was after we'd already dug the grave, so everything was set up nicely, and it was nice and quiet out there. And the funeral procession was just pulling in. At the same time, this flock of sheep came up over the back of the property, and I was livid. I was like, oh no, oh gosh, like we're gonna be on the news. And then I told the son of the deceased. He came up and I was like, Sergey, look, like I'm so sorry about this, man. Like I didn't know this was gonna happen. He just looked over and he's like, in life, sometimes there are sheep. It was awesome. So our second burial ever, we had a flock of sheep there. One of our earliest green burials was beautiful. It was a young woman who passed away of cancer. She was in her late 30s, and her family got together and they adorned her. So the thing, when you do a green burial, the person is wrapped in a shroud, but you kind of need something rigid underneath the shroud to lower them down respectfully, nicely, ceremonially. And so for our green barrels, we cut like a wooden plank, and then we adorn it with tree cuttings and flowers, whatever's in season. We cut all these clippings and make a nice like bough bed for them, and then the remains are laid on that. And then they adorn that with all these flowers and things that they brought. And I was like, oh, this is beautiful. And then they lowered her into the grave. And then her sister pops her trunk, and she had two like giant garbage bags of mycelium components there. And then like one of her best friends like hits play on a CD player, and it's her favorite Weird Al Yankovic road tripping album. And they started dumping all these mushrooms in there, and then somebody brought out a bottle of tequila. And for the next like 20 minutes, they just were dumping mushrooms in there and singing Weird Al and passing around a tequila bottle. And I was just like, whoa, that escalated. Like, and so, but it's like, there's like, as far as I'm concerned, in the human experience, there's been billions of us, and every society, every civilization has had to place their dead somewhere. And that is a ritual that has taken form literally a billion different times in different ways. And so there's no right or wrong way to do this. What's important is what resonates with the family and the people who are there, right? And so I we are really big on ceremony and acknowledgement, and I help families like going back to the cremation rate. A lot of people, so cremation, I think intentionally or not, it really buys people time, because at the time of loss, they're processing a lot. They're going, and then you might have a memorial service, or you can do a celebration of life, whatever. But a lot of times the family ends up taking the urn home. And 3 weeks can turn into 3 months, or you're waiting for people to travel and you plan a committal ceremony for the summer or whatever. So they've had a bit of time to process their loss. But then when they're ready to come to the cemetery, they're not working with a funeral home. And maybe they're not working with their pastor now because the memorial service was 6 months ago. And so they don't know what to do. Like, what does it look like when we come to bury the urn? And in my experience, because I've attended a bunch of these over the years, it's very transactional again. It's like, okay, you bought the niche or you bought the plot or whatever. The cemetery is like, great, see you Thursday at 1 o'clock. And like, Mr. Jones, thank you. Goodbye, Mr. Jones. Okay, thanks for using us. And it's like, no, like let's have some music going. Like, does anybody want to share something? And families are like, well, we had a funeral service already. I was like, I'm not trying to make this a funeral service, but I think it's important to acknowledge that this is the last this is your last engagement with the physical remains of your loved one. And today you are laying them in this space here that will now become sacred because this is their resting place. And this is the space you will come to visit for Lord knows how long in the future. I think it's important that we acknowledge today with some ceremony, and it's not a big weepy thing. Like oftentimes it can be very positive, but let people express themselves. And I think that just acknowledging that and asking those questions that get some thinking along those lines. We don't charge extra for it. Like whatever I have is at your disposal, but I want people to leave here feeling better every time.
Absolutely, and then that's a job well done. Believe me, that final act of kindness that the people can bestow upon that individual. I totally understand what
Mhm.
you're saying. And man, I'll tell you, Trevor, I mean, some of these turn out to be quite the party. I've experienced some that people would never be able to imagine it was a funeral service, but those people that participated will never forget it. That was a send off
Absolutely.
of a
Yep.
lifetime. So I appreciate all that you do. And this always brings me to my favorite part of the conversation. So, where do you hope to see Heritage Gardens, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you mentioned in my intro, I'm now kind of like our lead memorial designer, and that sort of sprung up because in the beginning we were just focused on cemetery operations. Like I grew up in Vancouver, I barely had a backyard growing up, and now we've got acreage. I didn't know the first thing about horticulture and what trees need, and I didn't know that there's like 15 different types of grass. So each season where we were spot seeding and stuff, our freaking grass, our lawns look like a giraffe pattern out there for the longest time. Like we've dialed that in. But um so families who needed a monument, they would just go to whatever monument companies are out there who are used to making monuments for every other cemetery. And so I started getting these huge, big, thick granite monuments coming out there, and I needed an excavator to move them around. And I was like, once I had like kind of 15 or 20 of those out there, I started thinking like, oh man, like if I don't get ahead of this, I'm gonna look like every other cemetery out there. And it just so happened, call it Providence, but one of the guys who had installed a memorial stone here was an artist from East Vancouver named Dan Bellin. And you should look up his website, danbellin.com. He he is a true artist, and he had been making memorials for just any cemetery, but he just had a studio in East Vancouver. He'd been making memorials for about 30 years, and he was like, "What is this place?" And so I was like, "Hey, I'm Trevor. Like my family started it. This is where we're coming from." He's like, I've been waiting my whole life to meet you guys. And so we struck up a friendship, and then COVID happened, and his landlord sold his building that his studio was in. And Dan was in his 60s, never had kids, never had a protege. And so he's like, hell with it. I'm getting out of the city. This is all crazy. Like, I'm over it. He was really pissed that his building got sold. And so he's like, he's like, the corporates are offering me X hundreds of thousands of dollars for my business, but I hate the corporates. Like, so he's like, I'll drop that to 30% of what they're offering me. If I do you guys want to take on my business and I'll teach you what I do? And I was like, OMG, yeah, man. And so we moved his shop here to our property and started a monument company. We call it Sticks and Stones Monuments because we use a lot of driftwood and stuff out there, and then obviously the stones. We say sticks and stones will mark your bones, but um, and then at that point, the gloves were really off because now I can work with landscape centers and local quarries and stone cutters, and I get sandstone from the Gulf Islands. He introduced me to all of his suppliers, and a lot of them are kind of artisan cutters in the first place. And so I found really quickly that the memorial design is a superpower because that lets the family, when I'm not throwing the bylaws at everybody, all of a sudden there you can capture so much damn expression and emotion in a memorial. And I bigger is not better. Bigger is a giant pain in the neck for me because now I need a heavy duty equipment. I got to put down ground cover and everything to move a rock around to do a burial, or move 6 rocks around to do a burial. And so I think it's infinitely more powerful that smaller and one of a kind, and is way better than your traditional whatever giant. So when I look at the next 5 to 10 years of Heritage Gardens, I want people to, when you hear about Heritage Garden Cemetery, I want them to think that we are a gallery. I want to become like a sculpture garden of memorialization, because every memorial out there is such an expression of love that the family has. And I mean, yes, some of them are very sad, like especially 10% of the people we have laid to rest here, which we have about 700 people interred now, and 10% of them are under 45. And that's like, I mean, we've like everybody in North America has been hit by the fentanyl crisis. There's a high number of those out there, but there's a lot of like children where just like life happens and it sucks. And so helping helping all families, but really helping some of those parents who are just going through absolute hell to come up with something beautiful, and it's one of a kind, and afterwards we break the mold. Like, we don't copy artwork. um my sister, I put her into graphic design school at the beginning of starting the cemetery because I wanted a website and business cards and a brochure and stuff, but that's ended up being the best return on that investment of all time, because now she plays like plays Illustrator and Photoshop like a keyboard. She's amazing. So the two of us have teamed up, and we can do some outstanding stuff. If you want, I can send you a couple photos of the cool memorials that we've done out here. But now they're like, like, I know that people are starting to come just to walk around and get ideas and to look at memorials. Like, now we're doing a ton of memorial stones for other cemeteries, and it's become quite a blossoming thing, which is really cool. But yeah, I want people, when they hear about Heritage Gardens, to not think about us as a cemetery, which is kind of traditionally is like a parking lot for dead bodies and kind of creepy. I want people to be like, oh my gosh, like, let's see what they're up to this season.
Absolutely. I mean, oddly enough, a wonderful destination of sorts, where people can come and see these forms of expressionism. That's a lovely vision, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, to have something unique, to have something one of a kind, to have something special, it really creates a different atmosphere. And the idea of having, like you said, a sculpture gallery garden, if you may, that's what it's all about. So I mean, we here at the Global Green Burial Alliance, support, you, Heritage Gardens, your everything that you're doing, and you give inspiration to others. So just know that, this video will touch a lot of people, and you're forward thinking. You're like many of us in this movement, we don't even realize that we possess the power of change in many ways. It's really not about trying to change something. We live in a cookie cutter world. It's about being individuals, and I think you've captured that. So, thanks for joining us today, Trevor. We really appreciate it. The viewers can learn more by visiting heritagegardencemetery.com, and please do share those photos, and we'll include them in the spotlight so people can take a look.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your interest, Ed. It's been really nice talking with you.
It's been our pleasure. So everybody, Ed Bixby, Global Green Burial Alliance, Spotlight now. See you at the next one.